Welcome back to the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. It's the first one of February and the final one focused on the class of 2022. He's Ryan Snyder, the recruiting expert for Blue White Illustrated. I'm Greg Pickel. Ryan, it's hard to believe that the class of 2022 is about to finally wrap up with the way everything went between not being able to take visits and then a rush of visits this summer. It was definitely one of the more unique classes either one of us has ever covered. But here we are. The final week of February is here. The traditional signing day is here, and I think let's start there before we get into some of the news, notes, and analysis related to this class, Penn State's recent junior day, and everything else. There was a time not too terribly long ago when this podcast would have been jam-packed with announcements and surprises and things that could happen and recapping official visits and so on and so forth. And obviously with the addition of the early signing period, which was put in place in December a few years ago, it's no longer the case. We do have one announcement we're going to get to, one expected signing otherwise that we're going to get to, but for the most part, this day has become a bit of a blip on the radar. There's a few top prospects every year who wait until now to decide, but by and large, it is not anywhere even remotely close to the event that it used to be, and I want to start there. Should it be that way? Should the early signing period stay intact? There's been a lot of discussion across the sport about how it hurries up, for lack of a better word, the coaching, hiring, and firing cycle, and it puts a big kind of rush at the end of the regular season, and it kind of messes with bowl season. So where do you stand on it at this point as we wrap up, a handful of cycles now with it in the midst of the recruiting world?
Well, I'll start with this. I mean, there's 5 guys in the top 50 for 0-3 who are still uncommitted. If I go through it here, I'm sure I could find a couple more. I'm looking good. Nope, not through 75. 6. So let's see, six guys out of the top 100 who are still uncommitted, right? So that's a pretty non-drama day. I don't know how to put best way to put it there, but this used to be a big deal, and now February, the first Wednesday in February, is pretty boring, I guess is a good way to put it. Now, that's a good thing for Penn State, and I think a lot of schools want it that way, but part of me really kind of thinks that we need to scrap the early signing period, or at least scrap when it is. I was always kind of in favor for something in August, and obviously you got to give the guys an out if a head coach leaves or something like that. I don't think you could give them an out if you had assistant coaches leave, because I think that opens up massive issues down the road. But maybe just, you allow somebody to sign in August, and if a head coach and the whole staff changes, you allow them to get out. But I don't know what the answer is, but to me, December 15th or whatever it was is not the answer. We've seen how it impacts coaching moves now, and it's just at a terrible time. And there's been so much discussion about how we need to redo the college football calendar, right? Whether it's, announcing conference games a little later in the year, or just taking the NFL model, right, and making sure that college football is in the news 12 months out of the year, and throwing signing day now right between bowl games and after conference championship games is kind of silly looking back. So now that we know the negatives of that, I do kind of think that we need to rethink this. And of course, I didn't even hit on the transfer portal, right, which is probably the main reason to change it now. So to me, when you look at how schools are scattered to start their spring semester, to me, I think really the best way to do this now would be to scrap the early signing period and move signing day back. Really not even the first Wednesday in February, but probably make it the end of February, or even the first weekend of March. I wouldn't be opposed to, or first week, not weekend. But I definitely feel like change is coming. I think there's enough coaches out there who dislike this. I've talked to enough people now who I know December is unnecessarily hectic, I guess,
Right.
is the way to put it, especially considering it's only like a 6-7 week gap here. So if you want to have an early signing period, I think there is a way to do it in the summer. I do believe there is a way to get that done. But to me, I don't see enough momentum behind that to think that that's going to come. I think they're just going to scrap this thing and go back. Now, whether that's this year or next year, I don't know. But I do think it's coming.
What would you say about an early signing day in middle of January, right before the contact period starts? So you have that dead period in the beginning of January. What if you move the early signing period to then, and then do what you're saying with the traditional signing day and move it back to either late February or early March? Would that alleviate anything? Would that solve anything? Or would it just give us 2 more days of targets for these schools to hit? I mean, I think ultimately the root of the issue here is the transfer portal. But it's also
Yeah.
coach movement. As we sit here and talk on February 1st, Jim Harbaugh is now in like week 4, it feels like. It's not been that long, but he's in week 4 of flirting with NFL possibilities. And there's reports out, of course, that the Vikings are one of the teams that have talked to him. And obviously, depending on when you're listening to this and how fast the news cycle works, that may change in one direction or the other. That's not really the point, though. The news of his decision is not the point. The point is that even with the traditional signing day, you have kids who are signed and kids who are even enrolled already, who may now be playing for possibly a head coach that they did not commit to, and for that head coach coaching players that he's never recruited before in all likelihood. So it is just an interesting situation. I don't know how you get around it. I don't know how you completely alleviate all of the problems and all of the possible obstacles and challenges that come with recruiting, and there's some that are just inherently built in and you're not going to get rid of them. But I think, to your point, Ryan, there seems to be enough momentum at this point that I just don't know how much longer we're going to have this December signing day. It just seems to me that I think we'll probably have it for the class of 2023. I don't think they're going to change it because, number one, they don't move fast enough typically. The NCAA,
well, the calendar's set
member
too.
schools, right? So they don't. Even if they wanted to for this class, I don't see how they could do it fast enough. But class of 2024, I think it's certainly something we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, moving it to January, I just think that the big issue remains transfer portal and not having that figured out. And I think if you obviously, I don't talk to coaches all across the country. I do talk to. There's a couple coaches I talk to that aren't on Penn State staff, and what I would say is I do feel like there's a unanimous belief behind them that the portal is the big issue, and until you have that whole situation figured out, it's really hard to project and really know exactly what your needs are. So to me, you can sign a handful of guys in before the season starts, who are locked in, the Bo Perbulas of the world. And I do also feel like if you moved it to August or sometime before the season, even beginning of September, whatever it is, I do think that a lot of guys would probably hold off. But then you just get that peer, that not peer pressure, but that pressure from coaches to sign. And, that's when you bring in a whole nother dynamic. So I think the real answer is to get rid of it.
Yeah. The only thing I would say about that is the idea of the December signing period was to give kids who were dead set on the school that they wanted to go to an opportunity to sign before the traditional signing day and the crush of January travel for coaches. Well, if that's the idea, then moving it to August would even seem to better suit that goal of giving kids a way to say, hey, look, I'm a senior. I'm going to Penn State. I'm going to Ohio State. I'm going to Michigan. No, I do not want you coming to my school on Wednesday when it's our install day and you're watching practice, and I'm not committed to you, and I'm not going to be committed to you. So to me, I think that would serve that purpose even better. But at the same time, you would probably just end up, you're right, with a bunch of kids just skipping that opportunity and waiting until February anyway. It's never going to be perfect. The transfer portal is never going to be fully figured out, I don't think. And if it is, I just don't see how that's possible. The problems here, you mentioned it a moment ago, as much as it's coach movement and as much of it's player movement, it's also and you're never going to solve this, the inconsistencies across the country with when the spring semester starts. And then you have guys like Caleb Williams who seemingly have had all the time in the world to get somewhere for spring practice. It doesn't appear that's going to happen at this point. And so the players obviously hold a lot of these cards too, no matter how you legislate it and how you work it out. So to me, it's going to be really interesting to see what James Franklin and what Sandy Barber push for as members of two of the biggest organizations, the Football Oversight Committee, which is under the NCAA's purview, of course, and Sandy Barber's the chair of that, and then James Franklin's on the board of the American Football Coaches Association, which to the best of my knowledge, can't necessarily create legislation, but it can certainly push with a lot of weight in the direction that its membership wants to go. So we'll see what they push for. But, when we got the chance to talk to Sandy Barber, Ryan, in Florida prior to the bowl game, the Outback Bowl, she had said that was one of the things that was on their list of talking points, is this calendar, and how do you fix it, and how do you make it so that you're not just moving a choke point, or you're not just changing, let's just say December is unnecessarily busy. How do you do it so you actually alleviate that problem a bit and not just make another month unnecessarily busy? So
late
that's
February.
Right. And that's basically where we're at this point.
I think that's the only way, man. One of us has to ask James this tomorrow, right? This
today,
is
if you're listening to it today, yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, we have access. Today's Tuesday, February 1. We have access to Franklin tomorrow on signing day, and whether it's us or one of our colleagues on the beat, I think we need to ask this question and just kind of get his thoughts. I I already know his thoughts. I think he does want things to be changed. I'm sure he's talked about it at some point. I faintly kind of remember him talking about it at one point, but especially after this coaching carousel over this past year.
Maybe the craziest we've ever had. I think it's probably fair to say. Yeah.
So it'll be a good topic to discuss. But I just, to me, man, I think we got to scrap this thing. I've always was in favor of an early signing period. Back to when I was younger and before we had this thing, and then now that we've seen how it plays out, or at least the December one, it's got to go.
It's one of James Franklin's biggest talking points, is that when things change, the unintended consequences that come with it are oftentimes overlooked and maybe not realized until a few years of experiencing them. And I think this is certainly one of those instances of that being the case.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. I don't have much else to say.
All right, it's the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. We're going to roll into some traditional signing day talk now. Penn State with one target left on the board, one target it has been commitment from for quite some time, and it's expecting to sign. Let's start there. Tyrece Mills, Lackawanna College, the latest Falcon to pick Penn State. He did not sign during the early signing period. He had some things to shore up at Lackawanna. It seems like, as far as you've reported at Blue White Illustrated, and remember, you can sign up for just $1 for 1 year of access to insider notes, just like what we're about to talk about here. You've been reporting this on the Lions Den premium message board, but all signs seem to be pointing in a good place for Tyrece Mills to be able to join Penn State a little bit later this year.
Yeah, the whole issue, he needed to get things worked out in the fall, and from what I understand, he did, or at least they feel good enough about it. I'm not saying that he doesn't have to finish strong here for this spring semester. Of course, he would enroll in May, but the thought was that they saw enough progress from him in the fall that they feel comfortable signing him now. Of course, with the way the initial counter rule works now, if you were to sign him tomorrow or February 2nd, we'll say, and then, of course, he doesn't become eligible, that scholarship will count against Penn State. And that was a rule the NCAA put into place a few years back to counter over signing, which was always
now. Is that for just the next season, or is that for what would be okay? Just the next
one season, because they're all 1 year scholarships, right? I mean, if there is a full 4-year scholarship now, but none of these schools seem to be offering it. It's all just a 1 year, so it would just be a 1 year thing. But Penn State doesn't want that. No school wants that, right? Every scholarship's incredibly valuable. So that was the hesitation on why he didn't sign in December, and from everything I was told, that they saw enough from him in the fall that, of course, he knows he still has to finish strong, but he understands what's ahead of him, and Penn State seems to feel good enough that they're going to sign him. So as of Tuesday, I'm expecting him to sign tomorrow, and we may get another one too. But Greg, you've been talking to Vega more than I have, man. What's kind of your thoughts on him?
So he's interesting because he has done probably more interviews with us and other recruiting media services in the last 2 weeks than he's probably done throughout the duration of his career. And if you're just getting up to speed here, and I apologize to him and his family because we're still not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name. We've been going with Vega Ioane, but I'm not sure if that is correct. Anyway, 3-star recruit out of the state of Washington, was committed to the Huskies until almost the early signing period. Backed away from that pledge as Washington underwent the coaching change that got rid of Jimmy Lake and John Donovan and co. and brought Kalen DeBoer in to be the head coach of the Pac-12 program. They kept their offensive line coach, Scott Huff, which was a really big deal, I think. to this 3-star offensive lineman. That's kept them basically in play here. Washington hosted him 2 weekends ago. Penn State hosted him this past weekend. My thought at this point is a pretty straightforward one. I think Penn State really impressed him. It's just a matter of, did they do it too late? And it's not their fault. I mean, again, the kid was solidly committed to Washington. I think made a wise choice to take a look at his options when Washington was kind of changing things and you didn't know where the assistant coach situation was going to go and where the head coach situation was going to go. Take a step back and be able to evaluate your options. We know that Minnesota's been pushing. We know that UCLA was pushing. They're not in the mix anymore, he has said. But, I mean, it's a 2-team race as far as I can tell. And my gut as we talk on February 1st, so again, if you're listening to this on signing day, February 2nd, his announcement's coming at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time. So you'll want to stay tuned to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for that. But my gut here is just, I don't know how we're going to answer this question until we hear his announcement, but it's a very simple question to me, Ryan, and we'll roll his highlights here for a sec. But is he going to see enough from Penn State to catapult them ahead of the lead that Washington has had for a significant portion of this recruitment? And does he want to come all the way across the country instead of playing for his in-state school? Those are 2 questions him and his family have to answer before making a decision. I would be willing to bet, as we talk about this on February 1st, that he knows where he's going to go, and he's going to announce it to the world on February 2nd, the traditional signing day.
Penn State doesn't seem to know yet, but again, it's kind of we're doing this early Tuesday morning. I mean, the question we don't know is how much does distance impact him? That's the one thing he hasn't really answered with us or anybody else, right? So, did that flight across the country and back home, how much did that impact him? Because you really don't even know the answer to that until he gets home, right? So, that's what time will tell. I can't pretend I have a great feel for this one either way. Some people think Washington.
I mean, if you made me,
I'd be lying if I said I knew.
If you made me put in an on-3 recruiting prediction machine selection at this very second, and I'm not going to do that because, like you, I don't have confidence in what I'm about to say. I'm just reading the tea leaves, but I think until we hear otherwise, I don't know how you don't give Washington the nod in this particular recruitment. Again, I think if Penn State would have hosted him for an official earlier and they would have had more time to work this recruitment, assuming it worked out differently on his end, I think they probably would be able to get the job done, and they could still get the job done. But to your point, how did he feel? And again, I think one of the things we forget about, and when you read the stories that us and our colleagues write on these recruits, no one has ever, very rarely has anyone ever had a bad official or unofficial visit to a campus. And my point here is more so that when they're leaving campus, when they're traveling home and doing these interviews, everything's fresh in their mind. All the amazing moments and times they just had for 48 hours on an all-expenses-paid trip at a college football program are at the top of their thought process, and everything's great and everything's amazing. But then when you get home and a day or two removed from that, whether it's thinking about the travel, whether it's just putting everything in perspective now that you're, in his case, literally thousands of miles away from campus, do you still feel the same way? Do you still have the same thought process that you had before? And a lot of times you don't get that out of guys until they do a commitment interview. And so we'll see how this one plays out. I think you have to give credit to Penn State for even getting him across the country for an official visit. Let's not forget, UCLA was pushing maybe just as hard to try and get him to take a visit to see them instead. He selected the Lions and Phil Troutwine and James Franklin and everything like that. I think you got to give them tremendous credit. They've been doing a great job so far with focusing on the offensive line and trying to restock that, retool that. This would be a great addition. We're just going to have to wait a few more hours to see if it ends up working out in their favor or not.
Enough said. I'm not going to pretend that. Like I said, man, I think Penn State's still waiting for an answer, and I will continue to press to try and get that answer before signing day. But as of now, it feels up in the air to me. But yeah, I mean, he seems like a better fit for Washington, in my opinion, just from outside looking in.
You're listening to the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. You can find the latest updates on that recruitment, much more about their traditional signing day. And, of course, we'll hear from James Franklin on Wednesday. Easy for me to say. All at bluewhiteillustrated.com. There's a look at the homepage as we talk on Tuesday. You can see that $1 for 1 year sign-up link. Don't wait. It's not going to be available forever. Visit us, bluewhiteillustrated.com, and sign up to join us today. Ryan, let's move into a little bit of recap work here that we have left to handle from the January contact period. A successful one, all in all, for Penn State. And 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, I wrote that Penn State doesn't typically gain January commitments, and they end up with two, which is certainly not what it's been in most Januaries in the James Franklin era at Penn State. They end up with two, though, two underclassmen picked the lines, two offensive linemen. I know that you talked with T. Frank last week about Anthony Donko. Is that correct? Anthony Donko?
Correct.
Yeah, so we won't belabor the point on him. But Cooper Cousins, really nice pickup for Penn State, an Erie kid who obviously is in the boat of guys we were talking about earlier. And he is a player that said, you know what? I know I want to commit to Penn State. Maybe I don't want to do all the bells and whistles and everything else. I just want to get this over with. He chooses the Lions on Saturday, and it's a nice pickup to start the class of 2024.
A lot of similarities with Birchmeier, not necessarily as a player. I mean, I think Cooper Cousins is going to be good. I think Birchmeier is pretty elite, but a lot of similarities in their mindset of, I just don't want to deal with recruiting. I think Penn State stood out from the front, from the start, and he just wanted to get it over with. And just from talking to him, he cares more about progressing as a player and doing the the workouts and whatnot. That's just way more important to him than taking additional visits. I will say that I was a little surprised that he ended it now. And I knew he's been leaning to Penn State for a while. I've had people tell me, they're like, hey, Penn State will definitely accept his commitment now, too, to keep that good momentum going, especially on the offensive line. So none of that really surprised me. But I just feel like he's a player who could have got some really good offers. And he didn't grow up a Penn State fan or anything like that. So this isn't like a Bo Pribula situation where once he got that offer, that's all he needed. So, I talked to him the other day. I asked him bluntly, were you a Penn State fan? And he said no. I mean, just he had the Michigan shirts and Ohio State hats and all that kind of stuff growing up. So just a college football fan more than the Penn State fan. So that surprised me a little bit. But there's nothing here that really gives me the impression he's going to be somebody who backs out of this commitment either. He's just a very kind of straightforward kid. Cares about, like I said, his progression as a player and the things he enjoys in life. And I just didn't get the impression that going on a bunch of recruiting visits was something that's very high on his list. So
there's some guys that are like that, and then there's some guys that are exactly the opposite. And I think that it's important to remember that not every kid wants all the wow and glitz and glamour of those recruiting trips. Some just want to get to work, and it seems like Cooper Cousins is certainly one of them. Penn State's first class of 2024 commit. We'll see where things go from there. Obviously, in February, much like January in most years, there's not a whole lot of action going on.
I will say, I'm sorry to cut you off, Greg. I apologize. I am really curious to see kind of how he projects and how he keeps growing. We have him. So we had him at the longest time at like 6'4.5", and now I confirmed, he's up to 6'5.5", and he's added some good weight too, man. He's up to like 300 pounds now. We had him at like 275, and that was going back to the season. Now I'm sure you lose some weight during the season. He was probably somewhere always around like 285, and since then he's climbed up a bit. But we have him as an interior guy. I'm just kind of curious on where he plans to be. And T. Frank's going to do a good eval on this. I know he's kind of trying to figure that out now, and I'll be talking to some people down the road. But the thing with Cooper is, like, he doesn't care. Like, he said he'll play center, he'll play guard, he'll play tackle. And, of course, when you're talking about somebody who has 2 years still in high school, there's a lot to figure out. And I will say being committed and still trying to figure out where you're going to play, that there is a perk with that, because now he can bounce ideas past Troutwine. Troutwine can look at his film all the time, and they can communicate, and that'll help him sort things out. But just with his size, there's some things that think he could be a tackle, and there's some things about his game that makes you think he would be a guard. Just kind of continues that tradition of swing guys. So again, we got 2 more years though of him growing. So by the time he gets here, he could be 6'7" for all I know.
Yeah, I was going to say, by the time he gets here, his body and natural growth should sort out his future position. I love the fact that he can play center, and if he ends up at that position at Penn State in a few years, that's great. And if not, he'll grow into something else. So just really like this pickup for Penn State. Let's stay on the offensive line track, Ryan. It's a Blue White Illustrated Penn State recruiting podcast. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. Sam Pendleton releases his top 5 class of 2023 prospect on Tuesday. NC State in the mix there, Clemson, Michigan, some of the schools on that list as well. Where do you think Penn State stands with him at this point? On Friday of last week, you did a deeper dive on where Penn State's board might stand in the 2023 class. So where does Pendleton fit into that mix? And with the list of schools that are on the table for him, where's Penn State's hat in that regard?
Yeah. It's tough to say. He was definitely leaning towards Michigan in November and early December, and it's hard for me to think that has just disappeared. But then you got the whole Harbaugh dynamic that makes it kind of difficult to read. I think getting a Clemson offer is a big deal, though, and if I had to put money down on the school right now, it would be Clemson, just because that's the school. The Clemson owns the Carolinas right now, and they've done a great job there for a long time, and he's made it clear for me from the first time we talked. Which is when he came up here for one of those games. I forget which one. He made it clear from the first time that, hey, Clemson is the school who's talking to me, and that's an offer I really want. So to me, I would think that Clemson holds the edge. There was talk about him deciding in February. I'm still kind of curious to see if he would. It would kind of surprise me if he would, because I feel like he'd be kind of rushing it a little bit if that was the case. But to me, I would think that Penn State's probably third if you include Michigan, and if Harbaugh were to lead, maybe they're second in this race, but they will take him because he's certainly a center prospect, and they would love to get a true quality center prospect that comes in, starts at center, stays at center kind of guy. So even with having 3 commitments on board already for the offensive line, they would still add Pendleton. But to me, man, just getting that Clemson offer, was it 2 weeks ago or I think it was 2 weeks ago. I think that's going to be the difference in this recruitment. So,
well,
we'll see.
Time will tell. Obviously, a very interesting prospect from the state of North Carolina. Penn State, of course, would love to host him prior to a decision, but we'll have to wait and see when that comes. All right, let's close down this edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. I'm going to add something off the cuff to our rundown here, Ryan. We'll kick something else to a later episode this month. But transfer portal offers went out over the weekend. Gabriel and Grayson Murphy, twin defensive linemen from North Texas. We've not had the chance to talk with either one of these guys. I'm not sure they're doing interviews until they make their decision. If they are, I've not seen anything pop up across the internet or with us here at On3. But, my point in bringing this up is more so to kind of point out for the folks that think Penn State is slacking in the transfer portal. They were one of the first schools to get into this race over the weekend when those two guys went into the portal. If you go look at their Twitter feeds, everyone's offering both of them. And when I say everyone, it feels like 3/4 of the top 75% of the, or top 15% rather, of the college football world have offered these guys. They're going to be able to go anywhere they want. But, Penn State is certainly throwing its hat in the ring quickly to try and make it a reality. We'll see how it plays out. I wouldn't be surprised if they stay south, but that's the latest on the portal. In addition to Hunter Norzad, of course, finishing off some visits, and we'll see what happens next with him.
These guys, Gabriel and Grayson, when they got out the other day, I checked in with someone, was like, hey, are these offers legit? Just because we've seen a few that weren't. And the response was, yeah, hell yeah. Have you seen these guys? So obviously I haven't watched a ton of North Texas over the years, but I did run through some PFF numbers.
You probably had a small wager on North Texas or its opponent at some point. Let's
probably their overs, because I think they were a pretty high over team this year, I believe.
Yeah.
But anyway,
as we talk about 2 defensive linemen, we'll just skip past that part. Skip right past that part.
But yeah, I mean, they graded out really well. I'm not saying PFF's everything, but I do use that with portal guys to try and get a feel for, the kind of season they just put together, and both scored basically in the 80s. I believe Grayson was just in the 80s, and Gabriel was like a 79.7. So put it that way. I mean, they only like Arnold Nivaketti would have a better grade than them, when it comes to Penn State's defensive line this year. So PJ Muster was on pace, to be fair. But both of those grades would, of course, they're playing Conference USA, so it's not very comparable. But just if you're just looking at the grade part of it, that would stack up pretty well compared to what Penn State had this past year. So only time will tell. I saw USC offered, I believe that was last night. West Virginia, UCLA. I mean, you named it. There's a bunch of schools showing interest. I'll be curious to see if they get up here for a visit. Obviously,
these
guys.
Now, let's just be clear about
this.
They
can't visit.
So transfer portal guys can visit. Okay.
Yeah, they can visit. They can come up now whenever. I mean, it just had to be. Well, actually, with being a dead period,
right?
But I think they can visit. I gotta check on that.
We're gonna look into that. Yeah.
Well, I'll check on that.
And again, so
no, you know what? I don't think they can because Hunter Norzad. Why did he squeeze in his visits before January 28th? So I think it's just 10 days before classes start, which is why they're able to do it ahead of other prospects. In case you want to get in
January, right?
But now with it being a normal dead period, I actually don't think they can. So yeah, good point on that. I will have to triple check and clarify on that. There's so many things with this recruiting, man. There's always something. Like whenever I think I got a good understanding of the rules, I'm missing something.
This goes back to our conversation earlier. There's so many little nuances and things that schools and coaches and recruits have to deal with. Trying to get everything on one track would certainly alleviate a lot of those concerns, I think. No question.
Yeah. Yeah, so we will see. But with Norzad, man, I mean, I've been kind of writing off Illinois for a while, and I have more and more people telling me I shouldn't, so that's probably not a good sign. There's definitely a belief that – but it's so scattered with him, though, because it just depending on who you ask. Some people think Iowa, some people think Illinois, some people think Penn State. It just tells me no one really knows. So, he's been good to, message with us and keep us in the loop for like when he's visiting and things like that. But as far as like actual reactions or truth, to know where those schools stand, no one really knows for that one. I do think Tyler Steen's not going to happen. His brother just getting offered by Virginia. I think that, it was clear his family were trying to get those two to play together, and Virginia took the bait. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where he ends up, or another school that offered brother. But just the Steen thing, I don't see really happening. So, yeah, we will see. Cam Butler too. I mentioned last week with T Frank. They did visit Cam Butler last week. James Franklin flew out there. I don't know exactly which defensive staff. I assume Scott was there. Of course, Cam Butler's the Miami, Ohio prospect defensive end that they're looking at. So there seems to be some real interest there, and we'll continue to dig on it, especially once we get past signing day here. But yeah, I mean they definitely need to add. I would think at least two more transfers for May.
Okay. Well, any final thoughts here? Should we cover Anthony Sacca quick? Penn State legacy recruit.
Love him.
Yep.
I love him. I saw him, in that St. Joseph's Prep, Penn Trafford game for the 6A state championship, and he was great. Now it's so early, man. 2025. I almost said 2024. 2025 recruitment. So, fans are always. I think if I was writing about anybody but Tony Sacca's kid, like nobody would care. But of course, because it's a Penn State legacy, I think some fans care. But I really watched him closely that night, and I thought he was one of the best players on the field in that championship game. I'm sure you can pull up the full game somewhere online and give him a good look. But lots of size there. I will say with his size, I don't have his profile in front of me, but I think he's like legit 6'3". I'd be curious to see if he bumps down into the box down the road. I mean, so we have him at 6'2.5", 200. I mean, he's a freshman, right? So 6'4", 225. I mean, like that's not out of question. With as much time as he has left in high school. So to me, we have him as a safety right now. It feels probably like linebacker might be inevitable there, but I saw a really smart player and somebody who's definitely interested in Penn State. Ohio State's already offered. I mean, he's going to have a stack list. Notre Dame, of course, too. So he's going to be somebody we're talking about a lot there, and I'm sure Penn State fans will be wanting to learn more about.
All right. Well, stay tuned for the latest transfer portal news, traditional signing day updates, and all the other Penn State athletics news you need. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Again, 1 year, $1. You can sign up, join us for an entire year of access for just $1. One of the better deals you're going to find, and it won't last forever. So that's at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel, and this has been another edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. We'll catch you next time.